Okay, so what we gonna do today is we gonna look at this radio broadcast from 1980 that warned of an impending disaster. And then that disaster actually happened a few hours later. So let's take a listen to this clip and then we'll talk about it. The date was March 29th, 1980. This is 7:46 in the morning. And the program director for WRVA, Mike Moore, is going to come on the air because there's something he needs to tell his listeners. Maybe he thought that he had this information from a credible source, and he believed it and he wanted to warn people. Others think that maybe he was just crazy. Some think that he was high or drunk on the air and doesn't even know why he did what he did. And others believe that this was part of a secret government experiment, so they didn't want people to know how vulnerable our nuclear reactors really are. The main focus of this video is the radio station broadcasting warnings of a disaster before that disaster actually happened. So here's what I think happened, because here's what happened right after this broadcast went out. He's gonna say this: "Attention, all citizens. This is the station WRVA," and it turns out that Mike Moore was telling the truth. But instead of it being one day in advance, what if he had called the day of and said, "So finally, the people of Richmond realized, hey, maybe this guy knows what he's talking about. Maybe we should listen to him." But by then, it was too late. The earthquake had already struck. Hey, there's an earthquake coming. There's an earthquake coming. Everyone leave town. Do you think that the people of Richmond, Virginia would have taken that warning seriously? Do you think that thousands of people would have piled into their cars and driven away from the city, even though it was a false alarm? Or would they have ignored it and thought that it was just another one of those hoaxers who always predicting earthquakes that never happen? Unfortunately, I think that most people would have ignored it. And that's the problem. People only take predictions of disasters seriously if those predictions end up coming true. He did get this information from a source inside the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. His source was this guy named Paul Dickerson. And Paul was a systems engineer at the North Anna Nuclear Power Station, which is about 40 miles from Richmond. Be proactive and prepare yourself. You can find out how to do that through additional resources. And Paul called him up and told him that there was going to be a strong earthquake and that it was coming soon. So Paul had absolutely no reason to lie to this radio station. He saw the fault lines. He knew that there was a massive earthquake brewing. He knew that it could happen at any moment. He knew that it would cause catastrophic damage. So he called this radio station and warned them. I think that he believed that there was going to be a disaster, and he was trying to save lives. But where did he get that information from? Well, in the days following the earthquake, the program director, Mike Moore, said that he got this information from a source inside the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. But the NRC said, "We don't know anything about this. Our people aren't saying anything. So we don't know if Mike was telling the truth or not." People reported that books fell off of shelves, pictures fell off the wall, but there's also one other thing that's very interesting about this earthquake that we need to talk about. Well, the reason is because they didn't take Paul seriously. They thought he was just another one of those wackos who was always predicting earthquakes and they just ignore him. And unfortunately, Paul was fired from his job for calling this radio station. But there's a very important lesson that we can learn from this. The United States government didn't feel that this earthquake was serious enough to report. In fact, they downplayed it so much that it didn't even get listed in the official record of earthquakes that happened that year. The United States Geological Survey said that the epicenter of this earthquake was actually a magnitude 5.0 and not a 5.8. And the local news media outlets picked up on that and ran with it. They said, "See, it wasn't that big of an earthquake. The government says that it was a 5.0. But seismologists from all around the country who were studying this earthquake knew that those numbers were wrong. They knew that this was actually a much stronger earthquake than what the government was saying, and they were extremely confused as to why the government was covering it up. One of these seismologists was a man named John Oliver, and he said, "I couldn't understand why they gave such a low value to such a large earthquake. It was so far from being a 5.0, I just couldn't understand it. There was a lot of damage." And it ended up being the most costly earthquake in the history of the United States up until that time. The total cost of the damage was over $100 million, which is well over $300 million today. We have received information from an internal source which indicates that there is going to be a major disaster in this area at 9 o'clock tonight. Monday, March 1980. You should take whatever precautions you feel you need to take to protect yourself and your family. And then shortly after that broadcast, he's going to go on the air again and say, "Attention, all citizens. This is the station I repeat, we have received information from an internal source which indicates there is going to be a major disaster in this area tonight. Take whatever precautions you feel you need to take to protect yourself and your family. the station WR, and then that's followed by some static, and then the sound of someone screaming, "Run! Run! Run!" This is a radio broadcast from WRVA out of Richmond, Virginia. So why did this radio station spend almost 10 minutes warning people about an impending disaster? Well, before we get into that, let me ask you this question. Do you remember the day that Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast of the United States? Well, if you don't remember it, you probably weren't alive back then. But if you were around, I'm sure you remember watching the news as the days leading up to Katrina making landfall. How they kept saying, oh, this is going to be bad. This is going to be really bad. Everybody should leave. And then when Katrina made landfall and it hit, it was much worse than even what the meteorologists had predicted. Okay, my question to you is, could you imagine if, right before Hurricane Katrina hit, if the radio stations in that region started going off and saying, everybody leave now, everybody leave now. You're gonna die if you don't leave. How many more people do you think would have left the Gulf Coast? How many more lives do you think they would have saved if that had happened? In the case of this radio broadcast, some people think that maybe this program director, Mike Moore, was just trying to save lives. At 9:03 p.m. on March of 1980, a 5.8 magnitude earthquake struck near Richmond, Virginia. And this wasn't like a small little earthquake either. No. It was strange that this radio station would broadcast warnings of a disaster, and then a few hours later a disaster happens. The reason that the government was downplaying the severity of this earthquake was because they didn't want people to know that nuclear reactors in the United States are built to withstand only a 7.5 magnitude earthquake. Now, the main focus of this video is under government cover-up of how weak our nuclear reactors really are. That's just kind of like the background story. I think that the person that was responsible for releasing this broadcast was absolutely sincere. But then on April 1st of 1980, the Washington Post published this article and it blew everything wide open. But why didn't the government listen to Paul? Why didn't they heed his warning and shut down the power plant? Let us say that Paul had called the radio station and given them the exact same warning, and in this situation, it just so happened that the prediction did come true. So I hope that you learned from this situation, which is, don't wait for people to warn you that disaster is coming.